100 1-kiloton nuclear bombs that are unaccounted for.
This is just crazy. Hi, I'm Tyler Fultz. I'm a nuclear engineer with a little over 10 years of experience in the commercial nuclear power industry, from engineering to operations to emergency response. I don't claim to know everything there is nuclear, but I can certainly share some knowledge. Today we're going to be looking at a video by Veritasium called All the Times We Nearly Blew Up the World, or Nuclear Near Misses. The term near miss has always kind of bothered me because a near miss is like we almost missed, meaning the incident actually happened, in this case being a nuclear bomb going off. I know it's a broad term. In my industry, use it too for various safety incidents. A lot of it personal safety, but you would think you would use the term near hit instead, but anyway, let's take a look.
Ever since the invention of nuclear weapons, humanity has almost accidentally destroyed itself many times over. This is a video about just...
On the note, destroy ourselves many times over, if he's referring to actually wiping us out as a species, no. Nuclear weapons are powerful, but they're not powerful enough to completely wipe everyone out, even with the worst nuclear winter scenario that has been postulated. It's just simply not enough nuclear weapons. But if he's talking strictly about nuclear weapons just wiping itself out, isn't wiping a group of people out multiple times, sure, it's actually quite scary how many incidents there have been involving nuclear weapons, and probably many more that they haven't told us about.
Of those times. It's about nuclear bombs and missiles accidentally detonating. It's about hydrogen bombs being lost. And it's about false alarms that could have led to the end of the world. On the 17th of January 1966, a B-52 bomber was flying over the coast of Spain. It was carrying 4 hydrogen bombs.
I think I heard of this one.
Each one 75 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima.
Hydrogen bombs, far more powerful than the atomic bombs used during World War II. It's because those atomic bombs were just fission bombs by themselves. These were fusion bombs, and they ended up creating a fission bomb to make things hot enough to induce nuclear fusion, because to induce nuclear fusion, you need extremely high temperatures, extremely high pressures, and enough time to cause the fusion to occur. And what better way to cause all those conditions than a regular fission-based nuclear bomb? So there you have it. You can get way, way powerful. You can even layer them up. 1 megaton, that's a lot. That's a pretty big one. That's well above average, but especially for in the 60s, that was the really big bomb era where there was one where Tsar Bomba, a bomb upwards of 50 megatons, was designed. It was actually designed up to 100, but 50, because 50 you could drop the bomb from a bomber and escape. Crazy time period.
This sounds crazy, but in the mid-1960s, during the height of the Cold War, this was routine. This was part of a military operation known as Chrome Dome.
Yeah.
Where bombers flew around the United States and skirted the borders of the Soviet Union with hydrogen bombs on board. The thinking was that if the USSR initiated a first strike, the US could rapidly retaliate by having bombers already up in the air and closer to their targets.
That's exactly right. It's crazy that that's a thing. That's a thing that was done. And this is declassified stuff from the Cold War. No idea of bombers. I know there are submarines patrolling out there. If this sort of stuff is still happening today, they're not going to tell us.
The flight took off from North Carolina and crossed the Atlantic Ocean with the plan to fly by the border of the Soviet Union and return home. The plane would be in the air for more than 24 hours. The flight was so long it required 2 mid-air refuelings. But long flights and mid-air refuelings were commonplace. Flights like this happened every day. The first refueling went smoothly. After flying by the Soviet Union and turning around, the plane needed to be refueled again. So at 10:30 a.m. over the coast of Spain, above the small fishing village of Palomares, the refueling tanker pulled up in front of the B-52.
How many accidents in all industries have started out with something going very routine, like a midair refueling. It always starts out that way. And it always seems to happen at around 3 o'clock in the morning. This wasn't when this happened, but the 3 Mile Island accident started with doing maintenance in the condensate polishing system in the secondary non-nuclear part of the plant. But that eventually led to cascading series of events, which ultimately turned out to be America's worst nuclear disaster that forever shaped the way the industry was done. Chernobyl wasn't routine, but there's a lot of industry events out there, and I'm not just talking about the nuclear industry, that start off with something routine, because people, usually experienced individuals, just letting their guard down.
Larry Messinger, the pilot of the bomber, recalled,
"We came up behind the tanker and we were going a little bit too fast. There's a procedure they have where the boom operator, if you get in a dangerous position, he calls breakaway, 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 and you immediately cut the throttles and drop down below." Well, there was no such call. We were dropping down below the tanker, and all of a sudden, something happened. There was an explosion of some kind.
The two planes collided. The boom arm, which held the refueling nozzle, hit the B-52, breaking off its left wing. The resulting explosion was big enough that it was witnessed by another B-52, which was flying 1.5 kilometers away.
Fuel tankers dealing with a lot of high explosives. Yeah, I couldn't even get the words out to break off because they were just that far off. Wow.
All 4 men on the refueling tanker and 3 of the 7 on the B-52 were killed in the accident. The 4 bombs fell to Earth. Each one of them had a yield of 1.1 megatons of TNT, about 75 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. A hydrogen bomb gets most of its power from the fusion of tritium and deuterium.
Oh, here we go.
Isotopes of hydrogen with extra neutrons. When these isotopes fuse into helium, a little bit of mass is lost, which is released as energy. But it takes a tremendous amount of energy to...
That's how nuclear reactions work. Whether it's fusion or fission, it's delta MC squared. That same Einstein's equation, well, nuclear is taking the little bits and pieces of it to get energy. And that's how nuclear power is produced. And unfortunately, you can also use that to make a bomb.
That reaction started, which is why a hydrogen bomb is actually 3 bombs in one. A conventional bomb, which when detonated...
Okay, he's counting the conventional, the fission layer, and then the fusion layer. All right, I got you.
The plutonium fission bomb, which then creates high enough temperatures and pressures and releases enough energetic X-rays to trigger the fusion reaction.
Good explanation. All your heat, all your pressure, and you keep it confined. Yeah, that's how you do fusion. Fascinating how it's so much easier to make fusion into a weapon than to make it in a sustainable power source. We've still got a ways to go on that.
The conventional explosives in 2 of the 4 bombs detonated on impact. Fortunately, to trigger the fission reaction, the explosion needs to be symmetrical. But since the conventional explosives detonated on impact with the ground, the shockwave wasn't symmetrical, and so the fission and fusion bombs weren't set off.
That's much the same. The fission stage is actually very similar to how the bomb in the Fat Man bomb was done during the Manhattan Project, and also the gadget that Oppenheimer and his team tinkered with and tested that ultimately became the Trinity site. That's why they tested it, because it's a very complex method, whereas compare that to the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima, which was just a very simple 2-dimensional move part of the critical mass in a straight line to the other one kind of approach. But yeah, this one needed a very specific and precise controlled detonation in order to get it to work.
Unfortunately, the conventional explosive blew up the plutonium core, contaminating a 2.6 square kilometer area of the Spanish coastline with radioactive material. The area is still contaminated with radioactive atoms to this day.
But after the crash...
That's a mess. And imagine just trying to explain that to a different country. Hey, we accidentally dropped some bombs on you, and well, hey, the good news is it didn't blow up in a thermonuclear explosion. but we just spilled a bunch of radioactive stuff everywhere. Oh my god.
Villagers were told to eat no locally produced food, and there was an embargo on it in nearby markets.
The third bomb was found intact in a nearby riverbed, but the fourth bomb was missing.
Somewhere out there off the sunny coast of southern Spain, an H-bomb is missing. It's been missing now for over 3 weeks.
H-bomb, hydrogen bomb, thermonuclear bomb, same thing. Big bomb that uses both fission and fusion.
Ambassador, how was your swim this morning? Did you by any chance stub your toe on the bomb while you were out there today?
Wish I had.
29 US Army ships were involved in the search, and it still took 81 days for the bomb to finally be located and recovered. I want to say this again.
Wow.
There was a hydrogen bomb that was 75 times more powerful than the one dropped on Hiroshima, and it was missing for nearly 3 months. This is not an isolated incident. It's common enough that the US military has a term for accidents involving nuclear weapons.
The D-Day clock thus begun ticking with a potential broken arrow message from Nellis Air Force Base.
Broken arrow is the overarching term for an incident involving nuclear weapons. There's a few other ones, such as bent spear, which is an issue with handling nuclear weapons. I think that one's at a bit of a lower threshold. Like a B-52 mistakenly carrying nuclear weapons when they didn't realize that they should have been carrying nuclear weapons. There's the term empty quiver, which involves the theft of a nuclear weapon, which interestingly enough, in the movie Broken Arrow, it's actually about an empty quiver. The fact that this happens so often that you have this whole glossary is just mind-boggling. Like, how many additional controls should you have? I mean, the nuclear power industry has all kinds of additional controls if you're doing, say, a reactivity manipulation, additional oversight, additional backup systems, physical systems in place that you have, detailed discussions, briefings, extra personnel involved, especially if it's something that hasn't occurred in a while. Now, I'm talking about the modern nuclear industry in the U.S. where I've worked. I'm not talking about Chernobyl. All kinds of things wrong with that. But it's fascinating how people are afraid of nuclear, right? And we put all these controls in place for civilian commercial nuclear. But the things that you probably should be afraid of, the weapons, it seems like there's a there's a disconnect there in terms of how many additional controls, oversight you need to have when doing manipulations associated with these things. Not active use of them in a war, but just handling them, patrols. It's crazy.
Call them broken arrows. The Pentagon officially lists 32 such accidents between 1950 and 1980. 5 of them occurred during Operation Chrome Dome.
So how many of those do you think actually occurred in total? Because, well, for one, there could have been a lot more between 1950 and 1980, because these are just the 32 that have been released and declassified. This thing probably happens more often than they would care to admit, so... And here we're just talking about American nuclear weapons, not all the other countries that have nuclear weapons. Russia, India, China, UK, France, all the other guys that have nuclear weapons. And considering we're dealing with people and processes, I would not be surprised if there's their equivalent of incidents involving nuclear weapons.
This is when a B-52 carrying hydrogen bombs crashed. In 1961, the first year of Operation Chrome Dome, a B-52 had a fuel leak and it crashed over North Carolina, carrying 2 4-megaton bombs. Both bombs fell to Earth. One had its parachute deploy and it landed on the ground mostly intact. The other slammed into a field and broke into pieces. The good news is that the
That's a mess.
conventional explosives did not explode, so radioactive plutonium was not strewn all over North Carolina. The bad news is that the conventional explosives didn't explode, and so there was a chance that the hydrogen bombs could be armed and ready to detonate with full force.
It would be in the same state it was when it was on the actual bomber, meaning it could theoretically be armed.
Recalling the incident 52 years later, Lieutenant Jack Revell, who was responsible for the safe disposal of the bombs, said,
"And as we started digging down, trying to find the second bomb, one of my sergeants says, 'Hey, Lieutenant,
I found the arm safe switch. And I said, great. He says, nah, not great. It's on arm.
I've heard about this story too. So, piece of equipment being left in the wrong configuration is called a plant status control event in the nuclear power industry. Let's go back to 3 Mile Island again. A contributing cause. All of the auxiliary feed water valves were left closed after a test improperly. Those valves should have been open. If those valves were open, auxiliary feed water would have been fed to the steam generators, and that would have mitigated some of the worst aspects of the accident. Because the accident, they lost their heat sink, the steam generators, so quickly that the core ended up heating up too much, and that ultimately led to fuel damage, the meltdown, so to speak. But if those valves were left open like they should have, and auxiliary feed water flow was allowed to go to those generators, we likely wouldn't have a 3 Mile Island accident. I mean, there still would have been, something would have happened, but it probably wouldn't have led to fuel damage. There is a whole department, it was actually one of the departments that used to report to me, would ensure that all plant equipment is left in its proper configuration. Note that for 3 Mile Island, that only would have been a problem under an accident scenarios, and what happened was it basically made the accident worse. This bit right here, though, to be one away from a megaton plus detonation, oh my goodness. This is what I was getting at earlier when I talked about the standards for handling nuclear weapons not being up to the standards for handling nuclear power plants.
At the time, a spokesman for the Department of Defense said that the bombs were unarmed and could not have accidentally exploded. But in a report declassified in 2013, it was stated that the bomb was armed. A single switch could have triggered the detonation.
And that bomb would have hit the ground, so that detonation, while it wouldn't have done as much damage overall with the burst, it would have spread a lot of nasty contamination. Way more than a typical nuke going off like during a nuclear attack scenario. So it would have been, even if let's just say no one was there when the blast went off, it still would have contaminated the ground so badly. So that's just crazy.
By the way, the bomb is still there, lodged about 50 meters under the field.
What?
After the bomb fell on the field, there was a flash flood, which meant that it couldn't be recovered. So to make sure that no one could dig up the bomb, the US military placed a 120-meter diameter slab of concrete over the whole area. According to the Pentagon report, there is no...
You can't make this up. I mean, yes, so concrete is actually very good from radiation. Obviously, this one's nice and thick, so it's going to protect people. It's actually in a way that's kind of similar to dry cast storage, and here you're dealing with way less on the order of fuel because the majority of it is fusion, so just hydrogen, helium sort of compound, and then that's going to stop what you'd get from the plutonium, but you can't make this up.
Detectable radiation and no hazard in the area, but a portion of one weapon containing uranium is missing.
Wow.
There are dozens more events like this, like the plane crash over Greenland in 1968. The 4 hydrogen bombs it was carrying burned up in the fire. The decontamination of the surrounding area took 4 months. That same year, the Soviet K-129 submarine sank in the Pacific Ocean, killing all 98 of its crew. It was also carrying 3 nuclear warheads.
The submarine one might actually be the easiest one to handle because it's underwater. It didn't specify if it was a nuclear submarine, but if it was, it's covered under the ocean where it's going to dilute any potential contaminant leakage, and it's still not good to have missiles down there just because someone could just go in there and take them.
Part of the submarine was covertly recovered by the CIA.
Yeah. And that's another thing, yeah, the other side, if you will, the country that you're having the Cold War with, in this case, the Soviets lost something and the Americans are going to take it. Absolutely, they're going to take it. It's, forget safety reasons, there is military and espionage reasons why you can't afford to have these kind of accidents.
Another standout incident occurred in 1965, about 100 kilometers off the coast of Japan. A Douglas A-4 jet carrying at least one hydrogen bomb fell off the aircraft carrier during a training exercise. The plane, the bomb, and the pilot were never recovered. So for more than half a century, there has been a 1 megaton hydrogen bomb lying on the sea floor, 4 kilometers below the surface of the ocean. It is one of at least 6 US nuclear weapons that have been lost and never recovered. In 1998, Alexander Lebed, Russia's former chief of national security, asserted that there are more than 100 1-kiloton nuclear bombs that are unaccounted for.
This is just crazy. Again, I can almost imagine, how this would be happen in the nuclear industry, the commercial one compared to the military. It's just mind-boggling. So full disclosure, no military background, never did any work with nuclear weapons. Probably couldn't tell you if I did, but I didn't. It's just mind-boggling to me.
The most well-known Broken Arrow event happened in September 1980. Inside a silo in rural Arkansas, a team was conducting routine checks on the Titan II intercontinental ballistic missile. The missile was fueled, ready to launch at a moment's notice. In its nose cone sat a 9 megaton hydrogen bomb.
That's a big one. Just for a sense, at least now, bombs were a little bigger back then, but we're talking 400 to 800 kilotons. So nowadays, 1 megaton is pretty good size. So 9 megatons, yeah, that's big.
As one of the repairmen was walking around the silo, the socket from his ratchet wrench fell off. It fell 24 meters, hitting the fuel tank of the missile and puncturing a hole. The highly flammable rocket fuel began to leak into the silo. The missile complex.
So, in the commercial nuclear industry, we have something called another program like plant status control called foreign material exclusion. And this one's actually not unique to nuclear, because if you have, like, say, a natural gas plant even, you have like an opened up steam turbine, you don't want to have bits of tools falling into the blades because it can damage the blades and bend them, warp them, and can affect the operation of the turbine. And this zone is regulated by a foreign material exclusion monitor. And a lot of foreign material exclusion covers are used if you're going to be working in the overhead. Above these, tools need to be secured to a person to the point where they're checked in, including tools like a socket wrench where bits and pieces can fall off. They need to be secure. They can either be taped together. They could also be fail-safe, meaning the size of the tool is larger than the hole that it can't possibly fall through. Here we're dealing with the hole of a silo, so that's going to be too big, but everything is going to need to be lanyarded and tethered to the person and all subcomponents. In fact, certain types of tools, like those sort of wrenches, like for people that are doing work, say, above the refueling cavity, which is where they physically lift and move reactor fuel assemblies during a refueling outage. Certain tools are just not allowed. Like tie wraps are also not allowed because they could fall in and become foreign material. Yes, the Foreign Material Exclusion Program is another program that is designed to protect the plant and ultimately to protect the public. Yeah, you would need to do that working with nuclear weapons as well. I also like the acronym. It's FME, Foreign Material Exclusion.
And surrounding area were evacuated, but a number of military personnel remained on site to try to defuse the situation.
The maintenance team had an indication of an engine fire and a rise in vapor concentration inside the silo.
At 3 a.m., about 8.5 hours after the puncture of the fuel tank, the leaking fuel vapors ignited, resulting in an explosion. This explosion led to 1 death and 21 injuries. The 740-ton door keeping the silo sealed flew more than 60 meters into the air.
Rocket fuel's some nasty stuff. Similar program like NASA's SpaceX would greatly benefit from having something to protect these sort of events.
It was recovered 200 meters away. The warhead containing the hydrogen bomb was also blown out of the silo, landing some 30
course it
meters
was.
away. Luckily, it did not detonate. And these are just the near
Okay, well, yeah, I was going to say, even if the conventional 9 megatons worth of plutonium munition, that's going to, even if it didn't blow up in a thermonuclear explosion, it could still spread some nasty contamination that could just lead to a mess.
that we know about. Of the 32 broken arrow events listed by the Pentagon, one, which occurred in the spring of 1968, remains classified. There are likely many dozens more nuclear mistakes and near misses the public knows nothing about, from every nation that has a nuclear arsenal.
My point exactly. These are the things that they're telling us about. We don't know what they're not telling us.
The worry of a nuclear mishap is not just the immediate damage done by a hydrogen bomb explosion. It's also the misunderstanding and retaliatory strikes that could arise. Imagine that in 1966, instead of hydrogen bombs falling off the coast of Spain, the plane crash occurred closer to the border with the Soviet Union.
That's another good point. I didn't think of that initially, but yeah, to the host country or the guys that are next to the host country, especially if they are, if those countries are already not on the best terms, that could certainly escalate things.
Humanity has been on the brink of nuclear war many times, and so far, we've been lucky. The closest we've likely ever come was in October 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The US Navy began dropping signaling charges into the water to bring a Soviet submarine to the surface. But tensions were high, and the submarine had not been in radio contact with Moscow for days. The captain of the submarine decided that war had broken out, and he was about to launch a nuclear torpedo. But the launch required the authorization of 3 men. 2 out of the 3 authorized the launch.
That is why we have some level of fail-safes before you do the unthinkable.
But Vasily Arkhipov did not. A full-blown nuclear exchange between the United States and the Soviet Union was avoided by the rational decision of one person. The historian Arthur Schlesinger Jr. later noted that this was not only the most dangerous moment of the Cold War, it was the most dangerous moment in human history.
Because of what it would lead to, it could have led to a full nuclear exchange between two countries that were at the height of tension, the US and the Soviet Union. And that would have been crazy. Not world-ending that a lot of people thought of at the time, but you don't want to stress test that. You really don't.
And during the Cuban Missile Crisis, with the tensions between the US and USSR at an all-time high, both countries still conducted high-altitude nuclear tests. The US set off a 410 kiloton bomb 50 kilometers above the Pacific Ocean, and a smaller 7 kiloton bomb at an altitude of 147 kilometers. 2 of the 300 kiloton tests conducted by the Soviets occurred in space. It's pretty hard to justify these actions. What if one of these tests was thought to be a nuclear first strike, leading to all-out war? Because false alarms happen for something a lot more innocuous than nuclear tests in space.
If you want to see a video talk a little bit more about nuclear war, please check out my reaction to Kurzgesagt's video on nuclear war. They even go into a little nuclear war scenario, and you can check out my reaction to that.
On the 26th of September 1983, the Soviet satellite-based early warning system detected the launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile. And their policy dictated that if any inbound missiles were detected, there was to be an immediate counterattack against the United States. This would have likely led to all-out war, but the Soviet officer on duty at the time of the detection, Stanislav Petrov, was skeptical of the reading. He reasoned that if there was a genuine first strike, the US would launch hundreds of ICBMs simultaneously, not just one. The detection system then warned Petrov of another 4 missiles headed towards the USSR, but these 2 he dismissed as a glitch. Petrov was—
Thank goodness he did. He used reason and the logic, which was sound, that an ultimate, if this was a full-scale nuclear war, but it clearly wasn't because just due to the small number of objects. Good on him.
Right. He made the right decision, and his clear thinking likely saved millions of lives. The warning system malfunctioned. It confused sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds for ballistic missiles. After this incident, Petrov took an early retirement and later suffered a nervous breakdown.
Wow, I didn't know that about him. I can only imagine what he would have went through after something like that.
Another close call happened on January 25th, 1995, when scientists launched a rocket off the coast of Norway. The rocket was there to study the northern lights, but Russian radar picked up this launch as it had a similar flight pattern and speed as the submarine-launched Trident ICBM. The incident was serious enough that a briefcase containing the nuclear launch codes was taken to the Russian president, Boris Yeltsin. I think most people believe the biggest threat posed by nuclear weapons is their deliberate use. There is this idea that as long as nations only have them and don't use them, they could act as a deterrent, keeping us safer. But all of these incidents demonstrate that the real risk of nuclear weapons is some freak accident. So far, humanity has been lucky, but how long until our luck runs out? But there is hope.
What do you guys think? Do you think that's a bigger risk, the risk of an accident causing something like that versus a deliberate use? Which risk do you think is higher?
In 1986, there were more than 70,000 nuclear weapons. In 2022, that number had dropped to 12,705, and more are being dismantled. But as long as there are any nuclear weapons remaining, the future of humanity is not safe.
That's interesting, an interesting statement, and I'm not sure I agree with that, mainly because nuclear weapons exist, we've known how to build them. Even if you were to get rid of them, it's not like we couldn't build more. So I do think the world is a safer place without countries engaged in a massive arms race designed to just this big tit for tat upgrades in missile technology. I know there was that discussion about hypersonic missiles that happened a couple of years ago, even though conventional ICBMs are also very difficult to intercept, so I don't really think that changes very much. But seeing the numbers go down is reassuring, but I don't think we're going to see those numbers go down to zero anytime soon. And even if we did, there's still that potential to make more nuclear weapons. I'm all about the peaceful use of nuclear technology. And if you're going to have nuclear weapons, please handle them safely. Follow the same advanced safety procedures that we have in the commercial nuclear power plant. So now, nuclear power has had some accidents, Three Mile Island, Chernobyl, and Fukushima, to name some, but I know all the design modifications that were put in, both in terms of engineering, in terms of the backup systems that we've had, and more robust core design physical defenses, but also the administrative, the procedural ones, the human aspect, the training of personnel so that they can have that respect for the equipment that they are handling. I at least feel that the nuclear industry has done a better job learning from these accidents and these mistakes. But part of it's the problem when you have all these accidents that are just secrets, is you don't have that opportunity to share those learnings to really improve as effectively. And I'm not saying, and things involving nuclear weapons, I can understand why they're being secret, but I would like to see good safety practices associated with handling nuclear weapons if they have to exist. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.